Hey people, it's NIyas713. This is Thomas Malthus, and this is from Britannica.com. Thomas Malthus, in full, Thomas Robert Malthus, born 1776 near Dorking, Surrey, English economist and demographer who is best known for his theory that population growth will always tend to outrun the food supply, and that betterment of humankind is impossible without stern limits on reproduction. This thinking is commonly referred to as Malthusianism. Malthus was born into a prosperous family. His father, a friend of the Scottish philosopher and skeptic David Hume, was deeply influenced by the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose book Émile, I think, may have been the source of the elder Malthus' liberal ideas about educating his son. Young Malthus was educated largely at home until his admission to Jesus College, Cambridge, in 1784. There he studied a wide range of subjects and took prizes in Latin and Greek, graduating in 1788. He earned his Master's of Arts degree in 1791, was elected a Fellow of Jesus College. His unpublished pamphlet, The Crisis, written in 1796, supported the newly proposed Poor Laws, which recommended establishing workhouses for the impoverished. This view ran somewhat counter to the views on poverty and population that Malthus published 2 years later. In 1804, Malthus married Harriet Eckersall. In 1805, he became a professor of history and political economy at the East India Company's College at Haileybury, Hertfordshire. It was the first time in Great Britain that the words political economy had been used to designate an academic office. Malthus lived quietly at Haileybury for the remainder of his life, except for a visit to Ireland in 1817 and a trip to the continent in 1825. He met and became close friends with the English economist David Ricardo. In 1819, Malthus was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. In 1821, he joined the Political Economy Club, whose members include Ricardo and the Scottish economist James Mill. In 1824, he was elected one of the 10 Royal Associates of the Royal Society of Literature. In 1833, he was elected to the French Academy of the Sciences, Morales et Politique, and to the Royal Academy of Berlin. Malthus was one of the co-founders in 1834 of the Statistical Society of London. Malthusian theory. In 1798, Malthus published anonymously the first edition of an essay on the principle of population as it affects the future improvement of society, with remarks on the speculations of Mr. Godwin, Mr. Condorcet, and other writers. The work received wide notice. Briefly, crudely, yet strikingly, Malthus argued that infinite human hopes for social happiness must be vain, for population will always tend to outrun the growth of production. The increase of population will take place, if unchecked, in a geometric progression, while the means of subsistence will increase in only an arithmetic progression. Population will always expand to the limit of subsistence. Only vice, including the commission of war, misery, including famine or want of food and ill health, and moral restraint, i.e. abstinence, could check this excessive growth. Malthus' thoughts reflects a reaction amiably conducted to his father's view and to the doctrines of the French Revolution and its supporters, such as the English radical philosopher William Godwin. Widely read for such works as Political Justice, Godwin took for granted the perfectibility of humankind and looked to a millennium in which rational people will live prosperously and harmoniously without laws and institutions. Unlike Godwin or earlier Rousseau, who viewed human affairs from a theoretical standpoint, Malthus was essentially an empiricist and looked at his starting point the harsh realities of his time. His reaction developed in the tradition of British economics, which would today be considered sociological, see economic sociology. Malthus was an economic pacifist, viewing poverty as humanity's inescapable lot. The argument in the first edition of his work on population is essentially abstract and analytic. After further reading and travels in Europe, Malthus produced a subsequent edition, 1803, expanding the long pamphlet of 1798 into a longer book and adding much factual material and illustration to his thesis. At no point, even up to the final and massive 6th edition of 1826, did he ever adequately set out his premise or examine their logical status. Nor did he handle his factual and statistical materials with much critical or statistical vigor, even though statisticians in Europe and Great Britain had developed increasingly sophisticated techniques during Malthus's time. The 20th century American sociologist and demographer Kingsley Davis remarked that while Malthus' theories were based on a strong empirical foundation, they tend to be weakest in their empiricism and strongest in their theoretical formulation. For better or for worse, the Malthusian theory of population was nevertheless incorporated into theoretical systems of economics. It acted as a brake on economic optimism, helped to justify a theory of wages based on the wage earner's minimum cost of subsistence, and discouraged traditional forms of charity. The Malthusian theory of population made a strong and immediate impact on British social policy. It had been believed that fertility itself added to national wealth. The poor laws perhaps encouraged large families with their dolls. If they had never existed, wrote Malthus, though, there might have been a few more instances of severe distress. The aggregate mass of happiness among the common people would have been much greater than it is present. These laws limited the mobility of labor, he said, and encouraged fecundity and should be abolished. For the most unfortunate, it might be reasonable to establish workhouses, not comfortable asylums, but places in which fare should be hard and severe distress find some alleviation. He continued publishing a variety of pamphlets and tracts on economics. And for those of you who don't actually understand, a workhouse is like a British invention. It's basically like welfare, where you go into a place and you have to work. In a way, it's very, very difficult to get out. It's quite similar to the idea of a prison. I mean, you could theoretically leave, but it's not easy to leave. So they're not that different from the U.S. system of prisons, where they use inmate labor. Well, they're not that different. Britain and America are quite closely interlinked in their ideas. But let's keep going. He continued publishing a variety of pamphlets and tracts on economics. In an approach less rigorous than Mercado's, Malthus discussed the problem of price determination in terms of an institution deemed determine effective demand, a phrase that he invented. In his summary, Principles of Political Economy considered with a view to their practical application, Malthus went so far as to propose public works and private luxury investment as possible solutions for economic distress through their ability to increase demand and prosperity. He criticized those who valued thrift as a virtue knowing no limit. To the contrary, he argued that the principle of saving, pushed to excess, would destroy the motive to production. To maximize wealth, a nation had to balance the power to produce and the will to consume. In fact, Malthus, an economist concerned with what he called the problem of gluts, or as they would be called today, the problems of economic recession or depression, can be said to have anticipated the economic discoveries made by the English economist John Maynard Keynes. Then again, a fundamental criticism of Malthus is a failure to appreciate the ongoing British agricultural revolution, which eventually caused food production to meet or exceed population growth and made prosperity possible for a large number of people. Malthus also failed to anticipate the widespread use of contraceptives, which brought about a decline in the fertility rate. And one of the reasons I've decided to talk about Thomas Malthus is his ideas are very influential in modern society. We keep hearing about the population control, the lack of resources, the lack of space, and the people need to be depopulated, etc., etc. Bill Gates very famously said that we need to reduce the population by 10 to 15%. The Georgia Guidestones talk about having a global population of 500 million in balance with nature. And for my audience, they always keep talking about how Africa is going to be needed to be depopulated. There's too many blacks, which is always nonsensical, because Africa is a continent and has a smaller population than either India or China, which together have 2 billion. Anyway, and you notice something when they talk about the resources. Europe and North America have a very small proportion of the world's population and yet use most of the world's resources, most of the world's water, even though they're not using it directly. To grow all the fast foods and like beef and cattle and stuff like that are shipped to Europe and North America, it takes a lot of water from hot third world countries that don't have a lot of it. And most of the world's resources go to Europe and North America. There's no scarcity of anything. It's just that one group of people get all the resources and the best of everything, and another group of people, Africa and the third world in general, get little to none of that. There is no population problem. It is simply that one group of people have too much of everything. Anyway, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. I'm going to leave this article in the description. If you'd like to support my channel, I'll leave my GoFundMe in the description. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'll leave that there as well. If you want to buy one of my t-shirts, I'll leave that there as well. Peace.